Let's continue this exciting journey through the Earth's history. We are, of course, talking in the context of climate change and global warming, but as we said, the present is past is key to the present, and what did we say? We said something that I already forgot. What did we say, kids? What did we say? You remember? Okay, let's find it and then say it correctly. So the present is the key to the past because we are using the present information to interpret the past evidences that the detectives put together. It's not just geologists, it's biogeochemists and the oceanographers and the glaciologists and the tree ring specialists and so on and so forth. And we said the past is the key to the future, so once we understand the past, we can think about what will happen in the future. How is that possible? Well, if you know the past and how the climate has changed and how ice ages appeared and disappeared and what impacts it had on animal life, plant life, and so on and so forth, then you can say, where on earth are we headed with all these fossil fuel emissions, and what can Earth's climate do with this much energy being trapped by the greenhouse gases that we are putting into the atmosphere and ocean and so on. So that's why we say past is the key to the future, because if we understand past climate and how carbon dioxide changed along with the past climates, then we can say something about the future. We haven't talked about the past carbon dioxide much yet, but maybe we'll do that as well. Okay, but you can just remember that when the dinosaurs were around, it was a very warm, so you can see how the continents were distributed during the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous, and it was called the Cretaceous hothouse because the carbon dioxide was over 1,000 parts per million by volume, and currently it's at 425 parts per million by volume or so. It was more than double what it is at present. So temperatures were very warm. There were no glaciers anywhere to be seen and so on. So they were wandering around everywhere, including in the high latitudes near the poles and so on and so forth. Okay, so here then came the age of the dinosaurs, which we already mentioned, but we'll come back to the book we are reading. It lasted until 66 million years ago. Earth had a warm, wet climate without any polar ice caps or glaciers. Forests grew close to both the north and the south poles. The CO2 level was 5 times greater than it is today. Well, the estimates vary. I said 1,000 parts per million, which would be 2.5 times, but there are some estimates that would say if you go back in time, you would find times when the CO2 level was 5 times greater than it is today. And of course, you want to ask a question: if it was so high in the past and it was so warm, why are we worried about a little increase in CO2 and a little warming? Well, kids, remember when the dinosaurs were around, we were not around. We only emerged as dominant modern human beings in the last 10,000 years, over which 10,000 years hasn't seen much change in temperature. Now we are changing temperatures rapidly by increasing greenhouse gases rapidly. So it's us that we are worried about. The planet is not going anywhere and biology will survive in some form, but what will happen to us and what will happen to many of the species? Okay, so that's what we have to worry about. The dinosaur age ended with another major change in climate. One theory is that an asteroid or comet struck Earth, and there are chemical evidences which allowed the detectives to conclude that a huge amount of certain chemical must have come from outside in the form of a meteorite, and then you have to find evidence for where the meteorite crashed, because if a big boulder comes in and crashes, it will create a damage in the Earth's crust. These craters that you call as crater lakes and so on, where meteorite crashes, makes a big hole and the water collects and so on and so forth. And such a crater has been found in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula. Okay, so The meteorite that crashed moved great masses of land. It buried plants and animals. Wildfires raged, and soot and dust filled the air, blocking the sun for several years at least. Earth became cold and dark, and a lot of new pathogens and viruses would have emerged, and dinosaurs either died from having no food and dark, cold weather and climate when it goes on for years, or they also could have died from diseases. Okay, so slowly the air cleared over time, and you see the poor dinosaurs running around happily, flying around, and here is a meteorite coming in suddenly as a fireball and exploding and crashing into Earth, creating dark, cold climate for many years. Slowly the air cleared, temperatures warmed and kept warming. By then our continents were all in place. In the modern configuration, you could see North America, South America, Africa, Northern Europe, Siberia, and so on and so forth. Okay, and still the planet got warmer. By then continents were in place. Small mouse-like mammals evolved eventually. Around 56 million years ago, Earth grew so hot that the palm trees and crocodiles lived above the Arctic Circle, which means the poles were so warm that tropical species like crocodiles were living in the Arctic Circle. However, for the last 2 million years or so, from the time some of our earliest human ancestors walked the Earth to today, the climate on Earth has been in a pretty steady state. We had ice ages and interglacials or deglacials, but temperatures mainly varied between a few degrees and relatively stable compared to 20 degrees warmer during the dinosaurs' time, right? That does not mean there haven't been any further climate changes. It means the planet settled into a natural climate cycles as well. A cycle is a series of events that repeat on the same order or a slight difference in order. You'll get an ice age, and lot of glaciers will come from the poles towards low latitudes on North America and Europe and Asia, and then they will retreat, and that happens on a time scale of about 100,000 years or so. So ice age comes and glaciers come down, and 100,000 years later it begins to melt away and disappears, and so on. So Earth has had regular cycles of warm and cool climates in the last 2 million years or so, with each cycle lasting about 100,000 years. That does not mean there haven't been any further climate changes, right? Already. Woolly mammoth, when you hear the term ice age, you probably think of the most recent one, a cold frozen time that ended about 12,000 years ago. Animals like the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed the cats were alive, and you probably seen the movie called Ice Age 1, 2, 3, and so on. And here is the woolly mammoth with its massive tusks and its very heavy wool, because it was living in colder high latitudes. And saber-toothed tiger, which had tiger-like pattern. It's a cat species that had these saber tooths. One well-known idea suggested that during this time, modern humans first traveled to North America, crossing a land bridge from what is now the region of Russia known as Siberia. So if you now know, Bering Strait separates the Asian landmass coming eastward and the North American landmass going westward. At some point, if there was a lot of ice, then you could have walked from Asia on to North America, and that's what has been suggested as the reason why we found human beings on North America, which was quite isolated by the oceans on the Pacific side and the Atlantic side. This bridge was made possible by shallow seas, a consequence of low temperatures during the Ice Age. However, new studies seem to disprove this theory. What does that mean? That science finds evidences and interprets the evidence and makes a hypothesis, and then it goes to find new data, more data, to see if the hypothesis you proposed, saying at that time it was cold and shallow seas froze and there was a land bridge for animals and people to cross, and you find more data that says no, this hypothesis, this story that we made up is wrong. So it's normal for science to change its mind based on new evidence. Okay, back then average temperatures were 5 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit colder than now. In some places even summer felt like winter, and ice sheets reached all the way to what is now New York City. Humans wore layers and layers of animal fur to stay warm. Let's make a little trivia here before we move forward. When we say glaciers came all the way to the New York City as it stands now, there is a little detail. We said when the glaciers build and they move, they keep pushing material ahead of it. The moraine, the rocks it crushes, and the soil it strips, and so on. And where it stops, it leaves all that debris that we call the terminal moraine. The most well-known terminal moraine is just next to New York City, and it's called the Long Island. Long Island is long, but it is basically a terminal moraine from the last ice age. It stayed there, it became an island, and now people inhabit it and grow food on it, and there's a university or two on it, and so on and so forth. So history has lots of interesting things. The detective works bring out some nice stories that you should listen to, and watch the Ice Age movie again and think of all the climate change and try to see how real is it what it is saying. Of course, movies try to make a story out of the past climates, and they are mostly for entertaining, but there are still some nuggets of truth in them that you can look for, because now you are an expert in paleoclimate or past climate changes. Okay, see you in the next podcast with continuation of this discussion on past climate changes. We are getting close to finishing this chapter 3 about climate changes in the past, and we'll maybe wrap it up in the next podcast then. Okay, see you.